Most people know the story of Muhammad the Prophet. But what about the 40 years before that? Today, we're going to peel back the layers on the man before the mission. We're going to explore the formative experiences that shaped him into someone his people already knew by a simple but incredibly powerful title: Al-Amin, the Trustworthy.
So let's start with his story. Picture this. It's Mecca, around the year 605 AD. The city's most powerful clans are at each other's throats, literally on the brink of civil war. And what's it all about? A single sacred stone.
You see, the Kaaba, the heart and soul of the city, had been damaged in a flood, and everyone was pitching in to rebuild it. It was all going great until they got to the part where they had to put the sacred black stone back in its corner. This was a massive honor, and every single clan chief wanted it for his tribe. The argument raged for 4 or 5 days, and things got ugly. Daggers were about to be drawn. The city was a powder keg ready to explode.
Right when it seemed like there was no turning back, one of the oldest chiefs, a man named Abu Umayyah, had an idea. He said, "Look, let's leave this to fate. The very next man who walks through that gate, he'll be our judge. We'll do whatever he says." It was a long shot, but they were desperate, so they agreed. Every single eye in that courtyard turned to the entrance, just waiting.
A man walks through the gate, and instantly you can just imagine this collective sigh of relief. Voices start crying out, "It's Al-Amin! The Trustworthy has come. We'll accept his decision." The man was a 35-year-old Muhammad. And that title, Al-Amin, well, that was already his nickname all over town. It shows you just what kind of reputation he had already built.
So what did he do? His solution was just brilliant in its simplicity. He didn't pick one chief over another. Instead, he asked for a cloak, spread it on the ground, and placed the stone right in the middle. Then he invited a man from every single clan to grab a corner of the cloak and lift it together. Once they raised it up, he personally took the stone and set it in place. Just like that, the crisis was over. Everybody shared the honor, peace was restored.
That story tells you everything you need to know about the man he'd become. But that kind of wisdom and respect, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. So that brings us to the real question we're tackling today. How did an orphan boy in 6th century Arabia build a reputation so solid that warring chiefs would literally put the fate of their city in his hands? To answer that, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
His story begins in Mecca in the year 571 AD, but his life didn't start with celebration. It started with a profound, painful absence.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's a childhood shaped by one loss after another. His father, Abdullah, died before he was even born. Then, when he was just 6, he was with his mother, Amina, and watched her fall sick and die on a journey. His grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who absolutely adored him, took him in, but he passed away just 2 years later. So by the age of 8, he's under the care of his uncle, Abu Talib. It's just an unimaginable amount of grief for a small child.
But even with all that sorrow, he was deeply, deeply loved, especially by his grandfather. Abdul Muttalib had this special mattress he'd sit on in the shade of the Kaaba. None of his own sons would dare sit on it, but he'd put little Muhammad right there next to him. And if his uncles tried to move the boy away, his grandfather would stop them and say this, almost as if he knew this little orphan was destined for something incredible.
And it wasn't just his grandfather who sensed something special about him. The traditional sources are filled with stories that suggest he was marked for a unique purpose right from the very start.
So, there was this Arab custom of sending city babies to be raised in the desert by Bedouin wet nurses. Muhammad was sent to a woman named Halima, and this is where things get really interesting. Her family was in a terrible spot. There was a drought, a famine. She said they couldn't get a single drop of milk from their camel, and her own baby was crying all night from hunger. But the moment she took the infant Muhammad, everything changed. Suddenly she had plenty of milk, her old she-camel was full of milk, the worn-out donkey she rode to Makkah somehow became the fastest in the whole caravan, and when they got home, their barren patch of land was bursting with green grass.
The turnaround was so dramatic, so sudden, that her husband turned to her and said these exact words. They were absolutely convinced that all this newfound good fortune was because of this blessed child they'd taken in. In fact, they grew so attached to him and the blessings he seemed to bring that they begged his mother to let him stay with them for another 2 years.
The stories didn't stop there. When he was about 12 years old, he went with his uncle Abu Talib on a trade caravan to Syria. Along the way, in a town called Busra, they came across a Christian monk named Bahira. Now, this monk usually kept to himself and never paid any attention to the passing caravans.
But this time, he came out, invited the whole group for a meal, and paid very special attention to the young boy Muhammad.
So Bahira pulled Abu Talib aside and told him he recognized the boy as a future prophet, someone foretold in his holy books. And what signs did he see? Well, he claimed that as the caravan approached, he saw trees and stones actually bowing down as he passed, something they only do for a prophet. He also said he saw a physical mark, the seal of prophethood, right below Muhammad's shoulder blade. The monk then gave this urgent warning: get this boy back to Makkah and protect him, because if certain people find out who he is, they will try to harm him.
So his childhood was this incredible mix of very real, very human hardship, and these extraordinary accounts of a special destiny. As he grew up, he started actively building the character that would one day define him.
When he was a young man, he was there when a really remarkable alliance was formed in Mecca, called the Al-Fudul Confederacy. This was basically a promise, a pact, sworn by several of the big clans to defend anyone who was being treated unjustly, whether they were from Mecca or a total stranger. Now, you have to understand, in an age where your tribe was everything, this was a radical idea.
So what kicked this whole thing off? A merchant from Yemen came to Makkah, sold some goods to a powerful local nobleman, and the guy just refused to pay him. The merchant, having no one to turn to, climbed a nearby hill and basically shouted out poems about the injustice. This public shaming actually worked. A few clan leaders felt compelled to act. They met up, swore their oath, and their very first act was to march over to that nobleman's house and make him pay his debt. Years later, Muhammad would say he loved that pact so much, he would have joined it even after Islam. That deep, deep commitment to justice for everyone, not just your own people, became a key part of who he was.
In his youth, he worked for a time as a shepherd, like many others. But as he got older, he started gaining a serious reputation for his honesty and integrity. And that reputation reached the ears of a very well-known and respected businesswoman, a wealthy widow named Khadija. She was so impressed by what she heard that she hired him to manage her trade caravan to Syria, trusting him with a huge amount of her wealth.
When that caravan came back, her servant could not stop talking about Muhammad, about his incredible honesty, his kind personality, his sincerity. And on top of all that, he'd made a bigger profit than any of her other caravans. Khadija, who was 40 at the time, was deeply impressed by his character and his skill. So she sent a friend to ask the 25-year-old Muhammad if he would marry her. He accepted. They got married, and she would be his one and only wife for the next 25 years, until the day she died.
So you see how it all comes together? The childhood losses, the signs of a special destiny, the passion for justice, the career built on total integrity. All of these threads weave together to create the man who stood before those warring tribes, the man they all called Al-Amin, the Trustworthy.
And look, this wasn't just a catchy nickname. It was earned. People in his community said he was the most honest person they knew, the kindest, the most even-tempered. His own wife, Khadija, said it best. She described him as someone who always helps the poor and the needy, who entertains his guests, who unites families, and who always endures hardship for the sake of truth. That was the man he was.
So, there you have it. A man forged by loss, by love, by a rock-solid integrity, and a deep-seated sense of justice. A man who could stop a war with a cloak and a little bit of wisdom. For 40 years, this is who Muhammad was to the people of Mecca, a respected merchant, a beloved husband, the trustworthy. The foundation was set, but what happened next, in a cave on a mountain just outside the city, would change not just his life, but the entire world.